This program is for educational purposes. It fits within YouTube's guidelines under the context of science.
I tell you what, man, I mean, I'll just spill the beans on this thought that I've had for a while. I've told a bunch of people about this, I think just in private messages. But so everyone knows like BPCs, has this reparative effect. It's great for repairing and connective tissue and for people that have inflammation and injuries and what have you. And it's anti-inflammatory. But it seems like it has an anabolic effect. And I've dug in the literature and I haven't seen anything that suggests it acts like an androgen or something like that, or it acts like insulin or what have you. The mechanisms. It's been a little while since I looked, but the mechanisms aren't. There's like one thing it does is upregulates growth hormone receptors. I know that's been known for quite a while, but it has an anabolic. It's probably connected to its effect on connective tissue. But if you think about what it does, it's a gut-derived protein, so it's found inside your stomach and in your gut, where there's just massive cellular turnover. And I think it's there very much in part to stimulate those cells into repairing themselves, because you've got a really caustic environment inside the stomach. Like the pH is very, very low for chemical digestion of foods before it gets to the enzymatic digestion in the small intestine through the pancreatic enzymes, et cetera, et cetera. So it's got anabolic properties. If it can let you heal, if it sort of makes you into a little bit of an adamantium type of person, makes you into what's his name, the superhero. Wolverine type of person. It gives you the sort of Wolverine healing property. Yeah. It's going to give you, it has a potential for anabolic growth as well, I think. So I'm waiting. I haven't seen anyone. It's kind of pricey, but it's probably less than growth hormone and definitely less than, I think, the real IGF-1. Yeah. But I haven't heard of anyone trying to use it in large amounts, to see if it makes you grow. If it's like
Andrew Barry and I have both talked about higher than what people would usually suggest, like up to 2 milligrams a day. And I take a milligram after training, that night. So I train 2 or 3 o'clock, and then around 10, somewhere there, 7, or excuse me, about 9, 10 o'clock at night, then I'll take 1 milligram. And I have gone higher. Andrew's talked about taking 2. So I do think there's something to it, man. I do think there's an anti-inflammatory quality to it, because I've had issues where I'll get a nagging pain, like bicep tendonitis running through that front head of my shoulder, and it's aching. I take 1 shot of BPC, and that pain is gone in a few hours, and it doesn't come back, and it tells me there's an anti-inflammatory something or another happening in there, because that inflammation gets zapped,
And I wonder, this is the interesting thing. I mean, inflammation, normally you think of, and I'm just trying to piece together, because it seems it's anti-inflammatory, but it's also helping with repair.
Yes.
And this is what, like that original study with rats where they created a rotator cuff injury, and literally the rotator cuff healed itself. So it's really powerfully reparative in its effects. And I have this sense that it may not be anti-inflammatory in terms of it's blocking the inflammatory process, but rather it's enhancing the process of repair. And thereby you have a reduction in what we typically see and sense as being inflammation. Yeah. So you don't get all the swelling and the redness, because instead of having to bring in a whole army, you can just bring in a smaller troop of the immune system, because they're all supercharged. You're making your immune system and all the effects, all the things that go on with repair of damaged tissue into super troopers. Yeah. Super soldiers, as opposed to, oh shit, we got this giant inflammatory thing so it's just speeding everything up. It's just enhancing everything. It seems like, this is how I've kind of pieced it together. So it may actually, there's probably a technical word for this. It's slipping my mind right now. So it wouldn't say pro-inflammatory, but it may be like literally enhancing the inflammatory response. So you don't have it increases efficiency.
Yeah.
You don't have to have as much inflammation, and you get more repair out of what is normally, requires that inflammatory response. Because there's a secondary action, like an important part of inflammation, is to make the person or the animal aware that there's an injury there, so they don't use it.
Right.
The pain is there to keep you from, you're building the bridge. It keeps cars off the bridge while it's under construction. Otherwise, you just fuck up the things you're trying to build.
Yeah.
So, but it seems like it's just speeding up the bridge repair.
Yeah.
So it's not blocking the inflammation. It's actually just making it more efficient, making it better. That's my guess.
That. I like that. It's a good guess, and I feel like we don't need to do an intro at this point because we already said some cool stuff that I think is worth keeping in the podcast. So, guys,
all right, we're done.
You're watching Muscle Minds episode. I think this is 121-ish, maybe. We're right up there. I'm not sure exactly. Scott Stevenson here. I'm Scott McNally. Our programming is brought to you by TrueNutrition.com. So check them out. They support our programming. You can support us by supporting them. Use our code THINK. And check out Scott's book, BYOBBcoach.com. Be your own bodybuilding coach. Scott, we actually got a question in the live feed. I think this will tie right in with our first question. He says, Leo says, could you point out some pros and cons of using Metformin for bodybuilding and timing? And that kind of tied in because you had a question here. Can I pull this whole question up, Scott, from your screen capture?
I don't know if I'd have to go and see. I asked both.
I'll just read it.
Yeah,
I'll just read it. He says, I have a question about glucose readings. I have some clients check theirs, and it's helped out a lot troubleshooting diets, carb loading, when to give them high days, etc. If someone's carbs are not high and blood glucose is still above 90 in the morning, is it possible they're eating too much protein? And he had kind of a follow-up there, and this is where I think it ties in to Leo. He says, I've already applied bitter melon and berberine to help. I've noticed that more endomorphic types, they seem to have not as good of insulin sensitivity, and I'm trying to get their diets to work better for their body type.
Okay, so what he said about the somatotyping, that the heftier endomorphic type of folks would tend to have higher blood glucose. That totally makes sense. That's what you see.
Yeah.
Generally, the heavier you are, the more body fat you have, the more adipose, central adiposity you have, or visceral fat you have, the more likely you are to have higher blood glucose. As a big caveat, let me pull you back up here. I was looking something up. Not sure if he's working with enhanced athletes or non-enhanced natties, but what you can find, of course, is that blood glucose can be elevated from growth hormone use. So sounds like this is all about people who are dieting down to try to lose fat. If they're using growth hormone, that can elevate the resting blood glucose levels. It's part of what growth does. And if you're looking to measure insulin sensitivity, I've said this 1,000,001 times, but it's I don't know. I haven't heard other people mention this, so maybe that's why this it doesn't come kind of feedback in the questions. You can use the HOMA index. It's a homeostatic method for measuring insulin sensitivity. You can actually find a calculator, an online calculator. All you do is just get your fasted insulin levels and glucose levels, and you multiply those two things together. Because you can be someone who has good insulin sensitivity. You'll see this in people who are like dieted down, and they're like, within a week or month from a show, super lean, their insulin sensitivity is super high, but they're using growth hormone, and they have high blood glucose levels. So the HOMA index is what's used in research, and you're missing part of the puzzle. You're looking at just the level of glucose in the blood, and what's important there to determine whether you're insulin sensitive or not is if it's high, that would suggest insulin insensitivity or insulin resistance. But if it's a little bit higher than what you would want, other things being considered equal, but it's able to stay there with a really low level of insulin. So your basal insulin levels are really low. That suggests you've got really a high insulin sensitivity. It doesn't take much insulin to keep your blood glucose at that level. It's just being regulated at a higher level than what you normally would be. And that's one of the effects of growth hormone. So it's just sort of upping everything in terms of the blood glucose level. So that's just something to consider. I would not suspect, if you look at the studies, the literature is a little bit mixed, but generally protein isn't something that's going to cause, in the intervention types of studies, you're not going to get insulin insensitivity from eating more protein. What you do find sometimes, epidemiologically, is that more protein consumption tends to track with poor insulin sensitivity. And to some degree, that's because your standard American diet contains a lot of fatty meats, and it's really the fat that's playing the role there.
Yeah.
And that also, if you sort of kind of tease out the science of the matter, you find that the higher protein intake, or individuals who have higher blood levels of like the branched chain amino acids in particular, also are people who have more body fat. And more body fat generally means more poor insulin sensitivity, more insulin resistance. So more bits and pieces. You're trying to cover this from all angles. So if someone's dieting down, and this is an easy way you could sort of test out his thought that maybe the protein's the issue. I doubt that it is. But generally you find that the more body fat someone has, when they're dieting down, we're in a caloric deficit now, the less their protein needs are. So they're not going to need to take in massive amounts of protein. But when you get leaner, or if it's a sort of person with a normal or average body fat, the leaner they get, the more labile that protein is, the more likely it is to be broken down, and the better off you're going to be having more protein in the diet. So if you've got someone and you're concerned, you haven't done a HOMA index measurement, you don't know what their insulin levels are, but they're sure they just got high glucose. As long as you've got them in a caloric deficit, so they should be losing, and they're high in body fat, you don't need to have them, at like 500 grams of protein a day or something like that. You can put that down to less than a gram per pound if someone's, over 20% for a guy, over 30% for a woman, something like that. And they'll be fine. The more body fat someone has, just on average, when they're dieting down, the more of that weight loss is body fat. So you don't have to have protein in there at a high levels to try to preserve the muscle mass the way you would with someone who's, in the single digits. Or a woman, who's getting down into the mid-low teens or something like that, really, really lean. So, yeah, it's a kind of a cool question, but the thing that, there's something to say once you kind of know where the person's blood glucose regulates meal to meal and what have you. But this is sort of an off kind of a side comment, but a lot of people, because it's science, because you get to make blood measurements, they like to measure blood glucose like during peak week and to figure out if someone's, how well they're filling up, where their glycogen levels would be, using that sort of a surrogate. The idea being that, once you're sort of spilling over, your glycogen levels are full, then that your glucose levels would start to rise. And if you were to track that, and let's say someone over the course of a prep, they've got like bi-weekly 2-day long refeeds that are very, very similar. And they see about the same time that, for instance, that the glucose levels start to rise, 36 hours in, and that's when they get really full and they start to spill. You can probably use that as a surrogate measure, as a backup measure. But when you're dieted down and you're like 4%, your fat cells are really receptive for glucose. Everything's insulin sensitive. So you could be, blood glucose could be very, very low, and it's just, and you're insulin sensitive because you're going to be insulin sensitive no matter what you do at that low body fat, or at least for several days. So you're losing out. You're not just looking at what's going in the muscle when you look at blood glucose levels. It's a function of body fat, just like you kind of said at the beginning answering this question The more body fat you have, the less insulin sensitivity you have, and the opposite is true as well. The lower body fat you have, the more insulin sensitivity you have. So the sensitivity of that test of blood glucose as a marker of how much glycogen you got in the muscle, how well you filled up, like during a peak week, can be greatly diminished in some people if they're really, really low in body fat, just because you can't tell. The glucose levels are going to just soak everything up.
Okay.
But if you know from experience that, they spill and everything matches up, then you can use that. Like, okay, we see, the glucose levels start to rise. And once they get to, if they don't get back to 110, an hour after the meal or 2 hours after the meal, then that tells me now we can stop. We don't need the next 2 meals because they just spill. We go no more. We don't get any fuller.
Yeah.
So, but you have to have done a biocalibration of that, basically, in my opinion. Or maybe there are guys out there who've done it so long and so much that they know, but I've never seen anyone discuss it from the whole body system standpoint in that way. It's just sort of this underlying assumption that the blood glucose levels tell you about the skeletal muscle, which is your main depot for glucose. But when you're dieted down, you got a different story. So,
yeah, that makes sense. So to carry this on, then continue maybe bringing in then glucose disposal agents. Can you tell us where would a GDA fit into bodybuilding? I guess just to start really basic.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because there's a lot of variability. We've talked before about Metformin, and Berberine has some similar actions. Actually, it can work just as well or better for some people. And so what's going on, at least in the case of many of the glucose disposal agents, is they're turning on AMP kinase. So they're activating a cell, sort of an energy system, an energy sensor in the cell, this big enzyme complex that tells the cell what its energy status is and whether it needs to be taking in and consuming energy, because there's energy consumption going on. So it's sort of the master switch, so to speak. It actually is. It's counterbalanced by mTOR, which is involved with protein synthesis. So when you've got an energy demand, you don't have your energy needs to go to, especially in muscle cells now, we're thinking, towards producing energy for muscle contraction, for activity, for doing things. But when you're recovering and when energy demand is low, that's when you could be repairing. That's when protein synthesis would be turned on. So the AMPK energy sensor switch and the mTOR, mammalian target or rapamycin, those basically interact with one another such that AMPK inhibits mTOR. So back to the basics here. The way that the glucose disposal agents work is they turn on AMPK, which tells your cell that it's got a higher energy demand, and it brings in glucose. And there seems to be some variability amongst people as to whether it helps a good bit with glycogen and glucose storage. And some people it makes them flat.
Yeah,
it will make you more insulin sensitive. Yeah. The thing that I've always sort of it seems like the analogy holds pretty well. It's sort of like how well people, especially like it's considered an off season when someone's doing a lot of cardio and they're trying to gain. Mm-hmm. Some people can do that cardio and they can get insulin sensitivity from that and eat to offset that energy expenditure. And it seems like for them, and I haven't even seen this really directly studied, but it seems like for them, they get a better P ratio as they grow, so better muscle relative to fat that's gained. And then other guys, because of their genetics, probably thousands of things, that cardio, because that's a signal that's counter to the muscle growth signal. So metabolically, molecular biologically, it's a different signal. It's that doing that cardio, they don't get leg growth the same way that some people do cardio and their legs just wither away when they're dieting down.
Yeah.
So you take an endomorphic person who has no problem putting on muscle, endomorphic in quotes,
right?
Putting too much weight on that whole somatotype thing. But someone who's got just the person who's got a lot of body fat, gaining body fat is their issue. gaining muscle mass is not. And they find they can get away and gain leg size. It's not a problem when they're doing cardio, but the cardio helps them eat more. It helps keep them leaner. That's a go. You take the same sort of thing. You can almost substitute in this sort of simple way of understanding glucose disposal agent. You can substitute the glucose disposal agent for cardio. So is cardio going to help you? If you have a problem holding on muscle mass, then doing a bunch of cardio is probably not the best way for you to diet down. That's a first step. Try to focus more on diet and doing as much weight training as you can, because that's going to preserve muscle mass without overdoing it. In the same vein, glucose disposal agents, they basically do, molecularly, they do a very similar thing to cardio. They turn on the signal for energy demand, that there's a high energy demand. As with cardio, there is a high energy demand. You turn that signal on, that inhibits mTOR, that inhibits protein synthesis, and now you're running counter to maintaining or at least maintaining a positive protein balance, or at least a balanced protein balance, and because you're trying to create you're creating this pharmacological signal for energy demand, and you get greater insulin sensitivity, but also you lose muscle mass.
Yeah,
potentially, or you inhibit the gains on the way up.
I've seen it, man. I've seen it happen. Like I remember it was really popular. It's getting popular again. That's why I thought this might be a good topic to discuss, because there's some people out there that are saying, in bodybuilding right now, that like everybody should take metformin. That's somebody asked me about it. One of my clients asked me about it recently, and some of these people that are saying this stuff are pretty well respected. But I do remember it about 10 years ago when a lot of people were using metformin, like 2012, about 10 years ago now. One guy who came to me, who was probably like if we were to try to type him, he'd probably be like more of like a mesomorph. And he was working with a big name coach who had him like just hammering the carbs. Like this guy was eating so many carbs in his off cycle, and he was using metformin with it. And he had like 150 grams intra and blah, 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 everything else. Like there was a lot of food in his diet. And he asked to work with me for a contest prep. And I looked at his diet and I looked at him, and I mean, he was in such great shape already. But then we realized, like we came to the conclusion, he really didn't grow that much. Like he was eating more than he had ever eaten in his life for an entire off season, and the changes he made weren't really that big.
Yeah, it just seems to be a huge spectrum of
and that was him, that was one person. But I've also seen it be helpful for like another guy who was very overweight, and had a hard time getting lean. And he was a guy that I know he's used metformin even during his off season, even like off season and in through dieting and stuff. And he's done really well with it. He's one of the guys who says it gives him a better pump, as a matter of fact. Whereas other people, I know myself, man, like I haven't messed around much with metformin, but I know Berberine. If I take too much Berberine, there's no chance in hell that I'm getting a pump. There's no way.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so there's just like different drugs, like name any over-the-counter drug or what have you. They work much better for some people than other people.
Yeah,
same's true for pretty much every drug. So these are just drugs. I tell you, it's an interesting thing you said, because I've seen that before. That people say everyone should be taking this particular thing. And I always like that usually makes me think, okay, why would you say that? Is this an essential, like everyone is, there are certain vitamins that are essential to the body. Otherwise we know, those are, your body can't produce. So everyone's going to need, the B vitamins, let's say, at some point in time, you're going to run into some problems. If you don't have vitamin C in your diet, you're going to run into problems, for instance, those sorts of things. But, what about the guy, what about you? Like if someone said you should take Berberine, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And there's not a pump coming, for the next decade if you do that.
Yeah.
It tells you something, so it's a wonderful thing to hear for someone who wants to know with black and white certainty what to do.
Yes.
And that's what what people like, because this can be a very complicated, confusing thing, because everyone's trying to sell you shit. Everyone's trying to like sell you on their stuff or their ideas or their thoughts, and that's what a lot of coaching is to help clear away the muck. Good coaches clear away the muck, and they keep you from doing stupid shit. And if you need someone for accountability, they do that for you as well. And then they help steer you on things that you wouldn't have thought of because they've been around longer than you, or they're smarter than you, or some combination thereof. Or they just, whatever, they just spend more time thinking about these things and you don't want to. But when someone says always do something, that makes me at least think, okay, that's a little extreme, because there's exceptions, it seems like, to most every rule.
Yeah. And there is a lot of that. I spend a lot of time interacting with the people who watch our podcasts at YouTube nowadays, and that there is a lot of that. And I think that the number one thing, Scott, that people get frustrated with about this podcast and you is that you don't spell it out. You don't put it in there. You don't put it into a black and white, that you should do this or you should take this much. I think that you've irritated some people. They just want the answers, Scott. Just give me the answers. Yeah. I get it though. Yeah. I get it though, because it is confusing, and it is a lot to think about, and it would be nice. And man, doesn't it feel good? I know as a podcast listener, I love that feeling when somebody tells me this is what you need to do, exactly.
Right. I mean, I can always answer, if I were you, this is what I would do, and that's pretty black and white, pretty clear. But it's a lot of time, like the question, I pulled it up here for myself. So I'm going to look at this question again. It says, I have some clients check-ins, and it's helped a lot troubleshooting carb loading, when to give high carb days, etc. If someone's carbs are not high and blood glucose is still above 90 in the morning, is it possible they're eating too much protein? Now, I was looking for maybe if there's another angle that we missed on this question, but my guess is that the body fat's probably too high. So you could, the bitter melon or berberine, a GD8, will help with that. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's also probably good too, now that I've looked at this question again, is that for someone who's got a lot of body, this isn't true for everyone, but a lot of times people who have a lot of body fat also have a lot of muscle mass. And like I said, they're going to be able to hold on to that muscle mass more easily. So adding that in, if for instance, they have a family history of type 2 diabetes, then that's may not be a bad thing to keep their blood sugar under control. And those people with more body fat aren't going to be at risk for losing muscle mass as much on average. But again, it's an individual deal,
All right. Well, listen, let's move on here, Scott, because we have another question. Yeah. And then we had possibly, if we have time, there was a thing about L-Carnitine that I wanted to ask you about. But right. I've got one little tiny minor question to throw in here, just because it'll be fun. What is one thing Scott can say that every person must do? Just curious what his answer would be. You need what?
Poop.
Poop?
Everyone should poop. I think everyone should poop.
We just got the tagline for the show.
That's, like if I can, like, in the next month, please, everyone poop at least once. Right. Otherwise, you're not going to make it.
I like it. It's good. It's true. It's good advice. It's good advice. All right. So when
I was in Chinese medical school, I had that's one of my this just occurred, and one of my instructors said there's a Chinese guy.
Yeah.
This is when I was in California, and he was hilarious. His English wasn't that good, but he got everything across. And like we were talking about herbs, there's some herbs that help you poop. They're for constipation.
Yeah.
And he would just say that herb Drano. Like Drano? It's like Drano. Like that herb's like Drano. It just clears out the pipes. He's like, you got to poop. Pooping's important. Number one, make sure they're pooping. Okay, that herb Drano. So yeah, pooping is important. If someone's pooping good, literally, if someone has good, normal, regular bowel movements, I will go into the details. It's a sign that they're fairly healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can support our programming by shopping with TrueNutrition.com. They're our title sponsor. They've supported us for a number of years. They have awesome health and performance supplements, You can ask Skip or Dusty or Scott Stevenson all about True Nutrition, and they'll tell you how good of a company they are. Hardcore bodybuilders have trusted them for over 15 years now. Use our code THINK. You'll get some savings. You'll support our programming. If you're in Canada, you can shop with supplementsource.ca. They have highly discounted supplements, discounts on bulk orders, and free shipping over $99. Check them out. And finally, you can directly support our programming on Patreon. I'll have links below for Patreon and everything else. We're taking more questions over there, and I appreciate everybody who's already helping to directly support our programming through our Patreon. All right, guys, thanks for hanging with me. Let's get back to the show.
All right, I left his name out, but I did take a screen capture of this next question.
Okay.
Hey, Scott, I have and this is going to be fun, I think. I have a quick question about Widowmakers. One of my favorite topics. When doing the set, do you hit failure, say at 10 reps, then breathe and do a few more and repeat until you hit 20 reps? Or do you stop 1 rep shy of failure and then breathe and then do a few more reps and so forth? I'm confused. Whereas which is correct, as I know once you've hit a failure point, you really take your CNS to the limit. Thanks, Scott. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. So the Widowmaker, as the name suggests, is if you were married, this set is going to make your wife into a widow because you're going to die in doing so.
Yes.
So you're trying to choose whichever strategy, and this is the thing about Widowmakers which makes them so much fun and makes them such an insult to your recovery ability, is you're trying to get as many reps as you can without putting the weight down. So he described like 2 kind of strategies. The first one was, basically managing your fatigue. And you remember the Bros versus Pros thing that they did on RX Muscle? That
of course. We're going to have Dave Smith, by the way, Big David Smith, on the next episode of Blood, Sweat, and Gear.
Oh, sweet. Awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait for that one. I love that dude.
Me too. I chatted with Dave just like a week or 2 ago.
And he's so strong, and he'd have a lot to say about Widowmakers too, I think. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. When he came up, people may not know that he was one of the competitors on that. At least once, maybe twice.
Couple times, yeah.
Just strong as shit, like full rock. The thing is, I remember when he did it, he didn't win, but his squats, like he covered like twice the range of motion than anyone else because literally his ass was like 4 inches from the ground.
Yeah, they were good squats with heavy weight.
Yeah. I think it was 405 and he did like 29 or some shit like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, so the idea is that you strategize to get as many reps as you can. Which of course means your nervous system takes an absolute beating. Now, another way you could configure a set is what he suggested in that second strategy, but that would be akin to what I've done with fortitude training in setting out how you perform the repetition. So his thought there, I think if I'm going to paraphrase, you take it till you're 1 rep shy of failure. So you don't go to a failure rep, you take it to 0 reps in reserve, and then you stop until you feel you've got another rep. And that would maybe get you, to where, who knows, you might be able to get 3 or 4 that way, and then eventually, depending on like if you're doing a barbell back squat, I tend to have the bar lower the way I squat. My low back would be the weak link there eventually. Eventually my low back would just something we're not letting you come up again. That would be exercise dependent. So, but you would get fewer reps that way. So the thing about Widowmakers that makes them so splendid is that you learn better how to manage your fatigue and get those reps over time. So if you like go all the way in, just like he suggested in that second option, almost right to failure, you're not going to have as many reps in the tank, no matter how you manage after that. But if you go in and leave, 4 or 5, maybe 3 or 4, get yourself a nice break, and then bang out 2 or 3, and sort of avoid getting too close to the 0 reps in reserve mark until you have no choice because the fatigue has just gotten so great. You're going to get many more reps that way. So you end up getting more probably effective reps with that. Make this as hard as you can. And literally the thing that I've told people, we said this before on the podcast, is that You literally, people should see you if they see you do this, they watch you and they think that guy is on a suicide mission. He's trying to kill himself because it's like he wants to die under the bar today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've actually taken that mindset and said, this is it. I am going to go. This is the last thing that I'm going to do in this life. I'm going to prove who the fuck I am right now, pardon my French, and make this shit happen. And so the nuances of that, like why you like this is so interesting because this came up as a memory that you sent me.
Yes.
When you did a fortitude training muscle round and basically did a series of like mini widowmakers in doing that. And I had a couple people on Instagram tag me on stories. One just literally happened today.
Okay.
I got tagged on one, and they were doing muscle rounds in that very similar way. So what I noticed in, a decade of experience doing widowmakers, almost pretty much by the time I came with fortitude training, is that there's a trade-off there between how much muscle stimulation you get and how much central nervous stimulation you get. So most people who've done like standard DC training and they've gotten to where, they've done it for 6, 9, 12 months or even years, and they've refined that technique of eking as many reps out as possible with the widowmaker, especially with back squats or some type of squatting movement. You realize that once you do one of those, like there's not much left. Like the quality of you're not going to do you could do a second one. You could just keep doing them, but your performance is you're pretty much shot. And it's such a drop in performance. A lot of that is probably the nervous system. I can go through other lines of evidence, so to speak, as to why I think this is. But like even once you're training along, you hit a really true failure point. You could rest 10 minutes and come back, and something's
still not the same. Yeah,
it's still not the same. And some of that can be primary muscle damage to the muscle, but I think the nervous system just takes a whack. So the idea that that's underneath all the set types in fortitude training, and that we talked about way back when you did that first muscle round, is that you want to try to eke out as much volume of high quality training and thus stimulus to the muscle, so as much muscle loading as possible, relative to the unavoidable to some degree central nervous stimulation, whacking of your CNS. So the more relative reps and volume that's high quality you can do without reaching that 0 reps in reserve or where you're just grinding and grinding and grinding, the thing you might consider is, what if I did 8 reps where I left 1 rep in reserve? You might be able to do that and never hit failure point. And it take the similar state of fatigue when you start off, and maybe you end up doing like 5 reps, but you do you're doing like literally widowmaker, where you do 1 rep at a time and then you wait 5, 6, 7 seconds. You do another one. You might get another 5 reps compared to those 8 reps, but you've just been right at the brink of failure 4 or 5 times. And you might be able to do another set where you never go within anything less than 1 rep in reserve. You could get 8 good high quality reps and then do another set that way. Get 8 good high quality reps, as long as you just don't quite go to failure, or maybe have 1 failure point at the end. So that when you're doing all those, when you do a widowmaker like that, those are high quality reps, but your nervous system gets whacked. So the idea with fortitude training is the rule for all the set types is that the reps are continuous. So you don't take those pauses, because those pauses, like, this, you can tell like you're going to fail. If you do another rep and then try the one after that, that's it. You're done.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you just take a little break, and you can eke a lot of reps out that way. It's all like what you're willing to do, and you get in the right machine, like that hack squat that you were on, that leverage hack squat.
Yeah, it was like a V squat or whatever you'd call it.
Yeah.
I remember that. I looked at that set, and just to clue anybody in who hadn't heard the story, I thought I was doing a muscle round where there's only 1 failure point. I now understand what a muscle round is supposed to be, but at the time I just thought it was 4 reps, then a break, then 4 reps, then a break, and 4 reps, and then a break. But I was just getting as many reps. If I could get 3 and then take a break and then get 1 more and then rack it and then take my break and then get 2 and then struggle and get 1. That whole set took like 4 minutes.
Yeah.
It was I failed on that probably a dozen times. You know what I mean?
Or you would have failed if you tried another rep.
Yes.
You rested, but you never did. So you truly had a 1 failure point. You did follow the regulations, but the continuous rep part would have made for a totally different deal. So
yeah.
Like you could have, if the way you did it, that was it. You're done.
Yeah.
You're not going to go do anything else, but you could have done a muscle round the way I set them up where the reps are continuous. Mm-hmm. So that means basically the weight's moving the entire time unless you need to readjust. And then when you reach failure, like literally you'll know it's coming. Like you'll get to a point in the muscle round. If people who don't know, you're doing sets of 4 with 5 deep breaths or 10 seconds, either way, depending. A lot of times with legs, it's easier to look at a watch because your breaths don't reliably tell you how long to rest because you start breathing so fast.
Yeah.
And when you're doing the reps are continuous. There's no pausing in between. So you get if you want to pick a weight, you can get at least 3 of those sets of 4, and then fail in the 4th, 5th, or 6th. But the failure has to happen when the reps are continuous. So let's say you fail in the 5th, so you do rep, rep, rep. You fail. That's it. You're done. There's no. That could have been the way you did it would have been rep, rep, rep.
Yeah.
And then another rep, and you probably would have gotten 4 in the next one. They would have been 1 at a time.
Yeah.
It would have taken you 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But you would have done it. And there's absolute validity to that. That's how the Widowmakers are. But even in DC training with Dante, notice he doesn't have you just do Widowmakers.
No, that's the crescendo. That's the crescendo.
Exactly. It's like a challenge set from a John Meadows program too.
Yeah,
you can only use those. It's kind of like a trump card. You don't want to use those too often because there's something to be had from them. But they're done at the end of the workout. A Widowmaker will be done at the end of the workout.
Yep.
So yeah, so that's the thing is they're continuous like that, and what that means is that you've also standardized. You're not getting more reps because you come up with a better fatigue avoidance strategy. So it's not like, this time instead of doing 15 right off the bat, I'm going to do just 12. And then I'm going to do 3 sets, try to do 3 sets of 3 and then 2 sets of 2. So I got 24 reps this time. I only got 22 the last time. It's like, yeah, but you did them differently. You segmented them differently. It took you like an extra 30 seconds. That's why. But if you're doing your reps continuously, then your progress isn't a function of how you stretched out the workload. So you're actually your power. There's really no power because you lift up and down, but your concentric power could actually be less when you get more reps. You could have had what is not really, in a certain sense, a better performance. It's just that you made it easier for yourself intentionally by strategizing how you perform the reps throughout the course of the Widowmaker.
Yeah.
So when you do them continuously like that, and now, like when you do this is the hardest thing for me. I'm totally used to it. The hardest thing is it's like walking off a cliff. Like I say, you're doing the rep. You're like, the fatigues, the failure point's coming, and you just say, "Fuck it, I'm going right at you." Just walk, boom, right into it, and you try to walk through it, of course. But when you hit failure, you hit failure.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I use that. I hear you in my head when I'm doing that, and I just say that. I say to myself, "Just walk off the cliff." I like that a lot.
Just go. Yeah. So that's the thing, about Widowmakers. If you're doing them like the way that Dante really didn't come up with that terminology that was being used before, but he by far has made that, like, people associate that with DC training for sure. Yeah. That's basically whatever you can do to make it happen. And eventually, you will find a pretty optimal fatigue avoidance strategy. And you will be able to get, if that's not the thing that's changing, not just getting better at doing Widowmakers, you're actually getting your performance ability is getting better because the muscle is growing. But it takes some time. And the thing is about, that the thing too about Widowmakers, it's, nice because we don't want to just poo-poo Widowmakers. I fucking love doing them.
They're the best.
Yeah, they're awesome. is they make everything else so much easier. So you learn how brutal training can be.
Yeah.
And then, normal sets are easier to a certain degree when you don't try to employ that strategy, when you just do continuous reps. But that is a problem, especially if you're using a logbook for tracking, that you're changing how you're executing the sets. Just your rep speed makes a difference in how many reps you get.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start changing those things around, range of motion, rep speed, just general technique, how much body English you're throwing, all that kind of shit. But the how you spread out the reps can make a big difference as to what goes on in the logbook, and then you don't have a very good tracking tool in the logbook. Keeping those things consistent.
Yeah. Well, listen, do we have time to maybe dive into that thing about L-Carnitine? All right. Let me see here. So this was from Chase Irons. And by the way, guys, Chase Irons has his own YouTube channel. So if you get a chance, go check him out. He's got some cool stuff. I saw he's building a gym right now, and he did like a little like a vlog type video where he went and checked the space out. So good luck to him with that. And he's talking about using massive doses of L-Carnitine. So the previous episode, we talked about L-Carnitine, and take-home notes for me were that for somebody that has low thyroid, taking orally about 2 grams a day is going to help potentially with that. And if somebody has high thyroid, taking about 2 grams a day is going to help with that. That there might be a kind of like a sweet spot, a middle ground, that you can get a good effect from L-Carnitine. But looking at the study Scott had, that taking too much might not, more is maybe not better. But that relates to his question here. He says, I've used much L-Carnitine, injected 500, 1,000, 2,000, 3 bills, $3 grand daily, IM, sub-Q, and IV. I've seen great results and benefits from it. I used it all through contest prep and got the leanest that I've ever been. My question is, what does it matter if L-Carnitine blocks some, he has in all caps, some of thyroid hormones functions if we still are able to increase fat burning and endurance while using large amounts of L-Carnitine versus not using it at all, and thyroid is able to perform all of its functions? What's the negative to it blocking some of thyroid hormones' actions when it makes up for it by improving fat burning, endurance, mental clarity, and so on?
So the last question is a loaded one. When he said when it makes up for it, we'll get to that in a second. So the devil's in the details. The sum of those functions is sort of where the heart of this matter lies. And I when I heard that question, it makes me think I didn't do a very good job of explaining. But then I thought, it's just because it's so damn complicated. It's part of the problem. So here's the thing. You can kind of put the actions of thyroid into 2 boxes. One, what we know that it does on the target organs that it affects is it stimulates metabolism. So if you become hypothyroid, your metabolism goes low. If you're hyperthyroid, metabolism can become runaway. And it's a very common thing. Someone tries to, as an emergency measure, take extra thyroid when they're already very low in muscle mass, and losing muscle mass is an easy thing to do. And they lose, 20 pounds in 3 weeks, and it's almost all muscle. They look terrible. So there's the metabolic effects, and then there's the effects of thyroid in regulating itself, because it's part of an endocrine system, a homeostatic endocrine system. And that's the crazy part about this, is that for instance, people with hyperthyroidism, you can use typical oral doses, 2 grams or less, and treat the side effects, the rapid pulse rate, insomnia, the metabolic rate that's run away, hyperthermia, those sorts of things that come with what we call a thyroid storm, or someone who's got a runaway hyperthyroidism with a small amount of L-Carnitine. But you don't see any effect on what's going on in the blood work. If there's a problem there, for instance, they've got an overproduction of TSH that doesn't get affected. So that's the sum of those effects. And what that means then is L-Carnitine can have a negative effect on thyroid's driving of metabolism that doesn't show up in blood work. So you don't, normally the blood work would tell you, okay, this is where my T3 is, this is where my TSH is, everything looks normal. Thyroid, as far as I can tell, is doing its job, but it only does its job once it gets into the cell nucleus, where it can impact genes that are involved with metabolism. So it's kind of like, all right, it's kind of like a security check. Normally the blood work would be your security check on thyroid. When it's about to go into the room, which is the nucleus of the cells, and do its job, and it comes in, you check it, it's got no weapons, you ask it what it's supposed to do, you're good to go, thyroid looks great, and then you send it on its way, and then L-Carnitine jumps in right there and shoots thyroid dead. Can't do anything. Totally blocks its ability to go into the room and do its job. Well, your checkpoint doesn't pick up any of that because it's looking the other way. It sees nothing, and that's the thing. So that's sort of the basic idea. But here's the interesting thing, and this is, I could go through the whole podcast again, but the interesting thing
no, please don't. I don't have the mental ability to process that again.
Yeah, I won't do that. There is, obviously, we know we shift towards more fat use, and we don't know what the dose response is in terms of how L-Carnitine affects thyroid's actions. So it could be that it's mainly an impact when you're hyperthyroid. We know it's a very, very powerful impact. Literally, it just totally blocks the like life-threatening effects of hyperthyroidism when someone's in thyroid storm. But you see up to about that 2,000 milligram per day, at least sort of meta-analytically and looking at the big picture, that up to that amount helps with fat loss, probably by shifting to greater fat use. So more of your fuel, if you're in a caloric deficit, comes from fat. That's a good thing. So the problem is, and this is the thing I don't know if Chase, and no accusations here, but the problem is that it could actually be a good thing to be using. He may have been using thyroid at the same time while he was using the L-Carnitine.
He's watching right now. So Chase, sweet. Tell us, were you using any type of thyroid hormone with this? He'll answer this for us.
Yeah, let me go look here on Facebook. We know he's watching. Yes.
There's a 20-second lag. Yes, he was.
Yes, he was. I see that. Okay, so that makes sense. I guess that Chase. Actually, I'm glad you're here. This is okay.
25 micrograms of T3 and 100 T4.
Yeah. So one of the things, to my knowledge, that's not affected is the ionization from T4 to T3. So that would have been effectively increasing the action of, or the amount of T3 that he has being T4 that's being converted, and the amount of T3 he has available. So that would have offset to some degree, because that's about how much T3 your body produces, sort of at a baseline level in terms of T3, and that's about how much T4 you get. So that would have offset some of a negative impact of L-Carnitine potentially. And here's the thing that I don't know about. This is kind of so interesting and so cool and confusing at the same time, is that up to that 2,000 milligrams, it doesn't seem like to be any noticeable impact on metabolic rate, because that still helps with fat loss. But once your thyroid levels are higher, or once your L-Carnitine goes higher, and we see that there's no improved fat loss with more than 2,000 milligrams from the meta-analysis, that's where we don't know relatively how much L-Carnitine can impact. So that use of thyroid that he could have very well, in some of those circumstances, I don't know about the 3,000 milligrams per day thing.
Yeah.
It's hard, I really don't know, because that's that's such a range too.
Yeah, it is a range.
But that could have been offsetting to some degree. The binding is probably that L-Carnitine binds the T3 in some way and just prevents its entry. in that manner. But the mechanisms haven't been elucidated as far as I know. So that's the thing that maybe, and Chase maybe not have noticed this, but the thing that I've heard from a couple people is that they find that they do better with a higher T3 when they're using L-Carnitine than when they're not. Or that's sort of been a trend that sort of made sense of them in retrospect. That's just totally anecdotal, and it's just a couple of people. So let's see if I haven't seen a response from them there on that. But that would be the interesting thing, And the way, and I've even thought, this would be a simple study to do. You could do metabolic rate measurements. This could actually be done acutely. You take someone and you do a baseline L-Carnitine metabolic rate measurement, and then
says the only side effects I noticed when I got to 3,000 was I started to experience insomnia after a few days.
Yeah, interesting.
But you're saying you could check your metabolic rate.
Yeah, you just measure metabolic rate, indirect calorimetry, and then load them up for a week and bring them back in again. You could measure it like after a singular load, or like after a day's worth of loading. Sorry, I've got a dog over here that's kind of panting. I think she's just having a dream. No, she's having a dream. She's been a little sick, so I'm just kind of concerned about her.
Yeah.
So, and that would be one way to kind of get at this and see, more directly what happens, and just use amounts that are higher than what typically people would take in. So, simple thing to measure. But Chase, does that help answer the question that you had? Let's see if he.
Well, he says it would be an interesting study to perform. He might not. He hasn't caught that yet. There's a leg. So
right.
They're behind us.
I'll say this though, kind of to answer his question there at the end, is that there's probably a give and take where more L-Carnitine could mean more fat loss. So there's some dose response there, and when you get to some point, maybe that extra thyroid has to be in place to offset the fact that you're blocking thyroid's actions. And eventually, those two things could be waging war against one another at higher doses. So you could, triple your L-Carnitine, you may have to triple your L-thyroid. You end up with kind of the same place. You still got better fat burning, not that much better. But eventually, too much L-Carnitine, at least from the studies, the case studies with hyperthyroidism, suggests that you can really block your thyroid and prevent your thyroid hormone from having its action. So what that means, of course, if let's say you block thyroid actions to the extent that you reduce your resting metabolic rate, so your baseline metabolism, energy expenditure by 500 calories a day, and your diet and your expenditure, everything would be set up to have a 500 calories a day. And that's going to be your caloric deficit, would be that 500 calories. Well, now the excess L-Carnitine, which isn't loading L-Carnitine in the cell anymore, you can only load so much. I don't know if I mentioned this in the podcast, it's in the article, but literally to account for the turnover of L-Carnitine in the whole body, it's about 15 milligrams, maybe 20 or 30 milligrams per day in a large muscular bodybuilder.
You did mention that, yeah.
Yeah, so in context, 200 is a lot.
Yeah.
So you can only load and enhance, at least if we're looking at this through the lens of helping with the L-Carnitine acetyltransferase enzyme, which is bringing fat into the mitochondria for oxidation. You're only going to support that so much. You can only load so much creatine. You can only load so much L-Carnitine. But you could potentially block your thyroid and then do away with the caloric deficit because you've reduced your metabolic rate. And that's something people could offset by using more thyroid. And a couple people have said they noticed that. So he may have responded.
Yep, he said certainly helped clear things up. Thanks, and he also said he's a huge fan. So we appreciate you, man. He says I remember you mentioning that, and I was like, WTF was going on with me, and over a gram then. That's a lot of L-Carnitine, man. But yeah, I mentioned Chase has his own YouTube, guys, so go check him out. He actually is a lot bigger than us, so we're promoting you guys to go see him, but he's got more people than us anyway, so he doesn't need our promotion. But there's that. So
yeah, hopefully that kind of clears some of it up. So, but I really don't know. It's sort of like the thing that like we were talking about before. It's sort of like L-Carnitine has such a powerful effect on thyroid in those situations where there's hyperthyroid.
Yeah.
That it's like, this is just something people should be aware of. And even like with metformin, glucophage, we're talking about has different effects, different people.
Yeah.
There could very well be some variability here. Resting levels of creatine vary, the extent to which there are non-responders to creatine. There can be non-responders. There could be hyper-responders potentially to L-Carnitine. Those things haven't been fleshed out. And we don't know the mechanism specifically whereby L-Carnitine prevents thyroid hormone from entering into the nucleus. So we don't even know what the hell how it's doing what it does.
Yeah.
So there could be something there that is highly variable amongst individuals along those those mechanisms.
Right
so a lot of unknowns, but it just feels like, look, something's burning over there. We should pay attention. There's a big, smoky thing over there that's worth looking at.
Yeah.
So,
well, this is all we got for you guys. Head on over to, we talked about Fortitude Training today. You can go to fortitudetraining.net or just go to byobbcoach.com. It'll all take you to Scott's book and to his training plan. And you can get the hardcover of the book over at Amazon, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. It really is like a one-stop book to cover your entire year. I'll tell you that. You really did. That is like your what would be a word to like describe your accumulations of knowledge in life put into one package? What would be a phrase?
A brain dump.
Okay, there you go. That's the Scott Stevenson brain dump. Guys, check out our sponsors too. Of course, if you're in Canada, check out supplementsource.ca. They've got a bunch of really good deals. You can get your ephedrine for like $2.50 for a pouch of them. Plus, they have a lot of really good high, top name brand supplements, Mutant and everything else. And you can get highly discounted deals on that stuff. And of course, we also talked about a little bit about Dante, a little bit about DC Training. Check out TrueNutrition.com, the creator of DC Training. He also has his supplement company, which has been a long time sponsor of our programming. I'm super grateful for that. That's the company I had wanted to have as some type of a sponsor in my life for like a decade before True Nutrition was even before I even podcasted, honestly. So I couldn't be happier to have them on board with us. It's a company I truly believe in. And if you shop using our code THINK, then you will help to support our programming. Guys, we appreciate you tuning in and being open-minded to all of Scott's thoughts. And Scott, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts, man. This is, this show, it's changed my life. It's changed my training. And I'm not just saying that to be like, oh man, you're so great. But really that little thing we talked about today with muscle rounds. And then I learned about the difference, about CNS failure versus muscular failure. And it really helped me to then explore and take my training. Just understanding that helped me to take my training to a completely different place over the next several years. And it was thanks to having that education that I got through talking to you. So there's that.
Thank you, man. That's what I'm trying to do. That's part of my mission, is just dump the brain, and hopefully there are some pieces that people find worth picking up.
Well, we appreciate it, man.
Glad you picked them up.
We get a lot of feedback like that too. There's a lot of people who appreciate you doing this. So thank you very much. And guys, we appreciate you tuning in. We will see you soon.